I never imagined I'd be standing in a courtroom facing the people who raised me, watching them demand a check for $350,000 like I was just another debtor on their list. But that's what happened. My own parents sued me not because I hurt someone, not because I broke the law, but because I refused to pay off a mountain of debt that wasn't mine. My name is Julia Bennett. I'm 34 years old, single, and for most of my life, I've tried to be the steady one, the reliable one, the one who doesn't make waves. I pay my taxes on time, take care of my health, send birthday cards, and keep emergency savings in 3 separate accounts. It never seemed to matter. My older sister Melissa was always the shining light of the family. 3 years older, louder, warmer, more exciting. The kind of person who could walk into a room and everyone would know it. She had dreams, big ones. I had spreadsheets. She took risks. I made plans. And somehow that made me the one expected to fix everything when her world collapsed. They didn't call it a favor. They didn't say please. They sat me down with a folder of documents full of numbers and deadlines and told me it was my turn. My turn to sacrifice. My turn to give back. Because I had no husband, no children, no family of my own. As if that made me less human. As if that made me owe more. When I said no, everything changed. The house I grew up in, the people I trusted to protect me, became a tribunal. And I was the defendant. I wasn't prepared for what came next. No one ever is. But by the time it was over, I had learned something that changed the way I looked at everything. Love should never come with a price tag. And if it does, then maybe it was never love to begin with. I'm the kind of person people forget to invite to weddings, but always remember when their Wi-Fi goes out. That's not a complaint. It's just the truth. My name doesn't linger in the air when people reminisce about college or birthdays or road trips. But when a pipe bursts or someone needs help filing taxes or applying for health insurance, they call me. I work as a software engineer for a mid-sized firm in Seattle. Nothing flashy. I don't run a startup or give TED Talks. I write clean code, meet deadlines, and make good coffee. I live in a 2-bedroom apartment just outside the city, close enough to walk to the market, far enough that no one drops by unannounced. The second bedroom used to be a guest room, but now it holds shelves of books and a desk facing the window. It's quiet there. Peaceful. That's how I like it. I've always liked it that way. I'm not married. I don't have kids. I don't go on vacations with a matching luggage set or send out newsletters at Christmas. My days are steady, structured, not boring. Just consistent. I know what I like. I know who I am. And for the longest time, I thought that would be enough. Then there's my sister Melissa, 3 years older. She grew up with the same roof over her head, but an entirely different world under her feet. She had charm that bloomed early and a voice that could make you feel like you were the most interesting person in the room, even if you were talking about accounting. She studied French in college, wanted to open a bistro by the time she turned 30, and somehow convinced my parents that a restaurant was the most noble pursuit a person could have. They supported her every step of the way, took out a second mortgage to help her lease a storefront in Portland, hired a branding consultant, paid for her business license, and flew out to taste test menu options. I sent a check for $10,000 even though no one asked me to. Melissa thanked me in a voice note that lasted 45 seconds and never mentioned it again. When the bistro opened, there was a write-up in a local food blog and a picture of Melissa beaming in a white apron. My parents framed the article. It hung in the hallway just past the front door of their house for everyone to see. No one framed my first patent. No one asked about my raise or the promotion I quietly earned last winter. But I didn't mind. Not really. That was the pattern. Melissa was the heartbeat and I was the background music. I was the one who sent care packages when she was sick, who watched her kids when her babysitter flaked, who fixed the POS system in her restaurant when it crashed mid-brunch. No one asked me to. I just did it. Because I thought that's what family meant. Being there even when no one noticed, especially when no one noticed. My parents, Gloria and Raymond, are the kind of people who still believe in answering machines and printed maps. They're good people in most ways, but they've always carried this idea that children should fit into boxes. Melissa fit theirs perfectly. She cooked with passion, loved loudly, and failed dramatically. They understood that. They could hold it. Me, with my quiet job and steady hands, confused them. I was too independent, too private, too fine. I think they thought I didn't need anything. Maybe that's why they never gave me much. Growing up, Melissa got the larger room, the new bicycle, the dress with the sequins. I got the leftovers, and I told myself it didn't matter. As adults, it was the same pattern with new labels. Melissa was the artist. I was the accountant. Melissa struggled, and my parents rallied. I succeeded, and they said I was lucky. When the restaurant began to spiral, I noticed it first. The Yelp reviews turned mixed. The hours got shorter. The tone in Melissa's voice when she called me at midnight after a rough Saturday sounded brittle. But I didn't ask questions. I figured if she needed help, she'd say something. And I was right. She did need help. But she didn't come to me. My parents did, and they didn't ask. They presented. With a smile and a folder full of debt they had already decided I'd inherit. It was a Thursday evening in early March when my mother called. Her voice was unusually cheerful, the kind of bright that felt stretched like something pulled too tight over something darker. "Julia, come over for dinner tonight," she said. "We have such good news. Melissa will be here too. Your dad already made the chicken." I almost said no. I had a late deployment and a bug I couldn't trace in the new build, but something in her tone tugged at me. It wasn't joy. It was anticipation, like a reveal was coming and they wanted me to be part of the unveiling. So I said sure. I got in my car and made the drive to the house I grew up in, a modest 2-story with beige siding and shutters that had been the same faded green since I was a kid. The porch light was on the way it always was. Inside, the smell of rosemary and garlic hung in the air, but no one was in the kitchen. They were already seated in the living room. My father on his usual recliner, my mother on the edge of the sofa, and Melissa between them holding a manila folder in her lap. I froze for a second. The smiles were too practiced, too calm. This wasn't a surprise birthday or a family announcement. This was planned, orchestrated. My dad stood and gave me a side hug before motioning to the folder. "Sit down, sweetheart. Take a look." I sat slowly, reaching for it hesitantly. Inside was a stack of documents printed on heavy paper, dense with financial terms and figures. At the top were the words, "Business Debt Restructuring Proposal." I looked up confused. "What is this?" My mother leaned in, her eyes wide and hopeful. "It's for the restaurant," she said. "Melissa has a chance to save it. There's a buyer interested in a partnership, but they need the debt cleared first. We've already put in what we could from our savings, and we took a small loan against the house. This would cover the rest." I turned to Melissa. She was staring at the coffee table like it might crack open. "That's great," I said carefully. "I hope it works out." I started to hand the folder back, but my father held up his hand. "Those are for you," he said. "We want you to take over the balance." My stomach dropped. "Excuse me." My mother placed her hand over mine. "You're in a good position, Julia. You have no dependents, no mortgage, no major obligations. You can do this. Melissa can't. She's drowning, and we're too old to start over if this fails." I blinked slowly. "You're asking me to pay off $300,000 of debt." Melissa finally spoke, her voice almost a whisper. "I just need a clean slate, a second chance. The buyer is willing to take over operations. I'd still be involved, but not in the same way. I can be home more, with the kids. They need stability." My parents nodded in unison like this was a rehearsed pitch. I flipped through the documents again, the numbers brutal and clear. I had saved for 10 years for a house of my own. I lived modestly, avoided credit card debt, skipped vacations, and ate in more than out. That money wasn't extra. It was everything I'd built quietly over a decade. I looked at them, my voice steady but low. "I'm sorry. I can't do this. This isn't a loan. It's a bailout. And I'm not responsible for the fallout." My father's jaw clenched. "You've always had it easy, Julia. You never took risks. That's why you have money." Melissa believed in something. She took a chance. My mother jumped in gently. "We raised you. We've always been there. We didn't ask for anything until now." I stood up, folder still in hand. "I never asked for anything either, but that doesn't mean I owe you this. I left before anyone could stop me." I drove home in silence, heart pounding, throat tight. Part of me expected the phone to ring, for someone to apologize or at least acknowledge how absurd it all was. But instead, the silence grew thicker. By the weekend, it shattered, gone. The first text came from my Aunt Carol. "Heard about your little tantrum," she wrote. "Family steps up when needed, not hides behind a savings account." Then came the voicemails from cousins I hadn't spoken to in years. The guilt was swift and sharp. Melissa's kids were dragged into the narrative. I was accused of abandoning them, of letting them suffer because I didn't want to dip into my precious bank account. No one asked about the $10,000 I'd already given, or the hours I spent helping for free. I tried to ignore it. I told myself it would pass, that they would calm down. But I underestimated how far my parents would go to prove their point. 2 weeks later, an envelope arrived by certified mail. My full name printed across the front. Inside was a civil suit. Gloria and Raymond Bennett versus Julia Bennett. The claim was direct. They were seeking financial reimbursement for the cost of raising me. Total amount $350,000. I sat at my kitchen table staring at the envelope for what felt like an hour. The official seal, the weight of the paper, the cold precision of my own name typed out in a bold serif font. It felt like fiction, like something that happened to other people. I opened it slowly, hands trembling. The language inside was clinical detailed and entirely devoid of humanity. My parents were suing me for reimbursement of parental expenses incurred over the first 18 years of my life. They listed everything from hospital bills to school lunches to what they described as emotional development support. At the bottom was the stated purpose of the claim: funds to be redirected toward the restructuring and stabilization of Melissa Bennett's culinary business assets. I read that line 5 times. They weren't even pretending this was about justice. It was about money. It was about control. I called a lawyer the next morning. Her name was Karen Shaw. She had gray streaks in her dark hair and a presence that filled the room without volume. After I explained everything, she flipped through the packet without blinking. "They have no legal grounds for this," she said. "Parents are not entitled to retroactive compensation for raising their children. It's not a thing." I nodded slowly. "Then why do it?" "Pressure tactic," she said. "Emotional leverage. They think you'll settle to make it all go away. Or maybe they actually believe they're owed. Either way, we'll fight it." I spent the next 2 weeks gathering everything I could. Every bank transfer, every email request, every casual Venmo labeled "just a little help." I pulled receipts I didn't know I had. Old texts from my mother asking for bridge money when the furnace broke. Payments to Melissa for her kids' school supplies. Even screenshots of late-night messages from my father asking for advice on financial planning. Every piece told the same story. I had never withheld. I had never been selfish. But none of that seemed to matter to them. The day of the preliminary hearing, I walked into the courthouse with Karen at my side. The courtroom was colder than I expected. My parents sat on the opposite bench, flanked by Melissa and a lawyer I didn't recognize. Their eyes met mine briefly, but there was no warmth there. Just calculation. Melissa wouldn't look at me directly. When the judge asked the plaintiffs to explain their claim, my father stood and cleared his throat. "Your Honor, we are not trying to punish our daughter. We simply believe in fairness. We supported her for 18 years. We made sacrifices. And now we are asking for a portion of that investment to be returned so that we may help our other daughter during a time of need." The judge raised an eyebrow. "Did you contribute to the defendant's college education?" My parents hesitated. "No, Your Honor. She had a scholarship, and her grandmother helped with the rest." "Did you financially support her after the age of 18? Again, hesitation. "No. But we believe that the foundation we gave her is what allowed her to be so successful." Karen stood slowly. "Your Honor, we have documentation proving that Julia Bennett has been financially independent since her 18th birthday. Furthermore, she has provided substantial financial support to both plaintiffs and to their other daughter, Melissa Bennett, over the last 10 years. She handed the judge a folder. Inside were copies of every transaction, every note, every silent act of generosity. The judge flipped through them quietly, then looked up. So to clarify, the defendant was not supported financially by the plaintiffs after age 18, but rather she has been a consistent source of support for them. "Correct," Karen said. My mother shifted uncomfortably. "This isn't about money," she said. "This is about family, about values." "Then why the lawsuit?" the judge asked. Why not ask your daughter to help instead of threatening her? She didn't give us a choice, my father said. She walked out. She refused to be part of the solution. The judge nodded slowly. And what exactly is the solution? That she covers your other daughter's business debt. That she funds her restaurant recovery. My mother spoke softly. She has the means. She doesn't have children. Melissa does. This is for the next generation. The judge leaned back in his chair. So, because the defendant is childless, you believe her assets should be redirected to your other daughter who has dependents. Melissa finally looked up. She has no one. She's alone. This would give her purpose. I stared at her shocked. Not because of the cruelty in her words, but the conviction. She really believed that my independence made me less worthy, that my solitude made me less human. The judge turned to me. Miss Bennett, do you wish to respond? I stood carefully, every eye on me. I loved my family. I said clearly, I gave when they needed. I never asked for thanks. But this is not love. This is coercion. And I won't be part of it. Not anymore. The judge nodded. We'll reconvene in 1 week for a final ruling. Court is adjourned. After the hearing, I drove home in silence, not even the hum of the radio to distract me. The city blurred past in patches of gray and gold as the sun dipped behind the skyline, but I barely registered it. My hands were steady on the wheel, but my chest felt hollow, like someone had scooped something out and forgot to put it back. At home, I poured myself a glass of water and sat on the floor beside my couch, staring at the carpet like it might rearrange itself into answers. Nothing felt real. I had always known there was distance between me and my family, a quiet understanding that I was useful but not cherished. Still, I never imagined they would take it this far. A lawsuit. Over money I had never promised. For debts I didn't create. I checked my phone and saw the notifications had tripled. Texts, voicemails, missed calls. Some were from relatives I hadn't spoken to in years. Others from people I barely remembered. They all carried the same message. Melissa needs you. Don't be selfish. Do the right thing. Family is everything. My cousin Brian left a voicemail that started with Julia. This is hard for all of us, and ended with, I hope one day you understand what loyalty means. The words sank like stones. Not one of them asked what really happened. Not one asked how I was. Not even Melissa, especially not her. She had let them speak for her, or maybe she was too comfortable letting the narrative unfold without interference. Either way, the silence from her was worse than any of their noise. I stopped replying. I blocked numbers one by one until my phone stopped buzzing. I logged out of social media and canceled dinner plans with friends I didn't have the energy to pretend with. I spent those days in quiet, motionless rituals. Wake up, make tea, sit by the window, open my laptop, go through code, answer emails, take walks in the evening alone with only the sound of my footsteps. At night, I would lie in bed, staring at the ceiling, tracing old memories like constellations, trying to find patterns in the chaos. I remembered Melissa reading to me when I was little, the way she'd braid my hair before school, the time she punched a boy in 5th grade because he made fun of my glasses. I remembered my mother brushing crumbs from my lap during church, whispering, "You're not a messy girl," and my father teaching me how to check tire pressure, even though he knew I'd probably forget. Those were real. They weren't lies, but they weren't enough to balance what came after. I wanted to believe that people could make mistakes and still be good, that family could bend and not break. But what they did wasn't bending. It was calculated, strategic, and cruel. The hardest part wasn't the betrayal. It was realizing that I had spent most of my adult life giving pieces of myself to people who saw those gifts as obligations. Like my success was a communal pot they could draw from whenever their own plans failed. That kind of thinking doesn't come from nowhere. It's built over time, brick by brick, through every time they praised Melissa's creativity and dismissed my caution, through every conversation that ended with, "We just know you'll be fine, Julia. You always are." I wasn't fine. I wasn't okay. I was unraveling and no one seemed to notice. I made a spreadsheet one night listing every dollar I had sent them over the years. The retainer for Melissa's first accountant, the down payment for her food truck that never materialized, the new laptop for my dad after his old one crashed the emergency plumbing repairs at my parents' house, The birthday parties, the unpaid invoices, the quiet rescues. It totaled over $72,000. I stared at the sum for a long time and then deleted the file. It wasn't about the money. It never had been. It was about the expectation, the entitlement, the way they looked at me not as a daughter or sister, but as a resource, a fallback plan, a safety net. The week before the final hearing, I went to the ocean, just for the day. I sat on a weathered bench overlooking the shore and listened to the waves pull at the earth like it owed them something. The wind was cold and sharp and honest. I closed my eyes and let the salt sting my throat. For the first time in weeks, I didn't feel hollow. I felt angry, and underneath that, a kind of resolve I hadn't known I needed. I wouldn't run. I wouldn't hide. I would stand in that courtroom again, not because I owed them anything, but because I owed myself the truth. I had given enough. It was time to stop. The envelope arrived on a cloudy Tuesday, dropped into my mailbox with the quiet finality of bad news dressed in legal formatting. It was thicker than usual, with a return address stamped from the county courthouse. I held it for a moment, heart-pounding, even though I already knew what it was. The summons. The official confirmation that my parents were not bluffing, not trying to scare me into submission, but fully committed to dragging me through the legal system over a decision I had every right to make. I brought it inside and opened it slowly at the kitchen counter. There were 4 documents inside, printed on heavy cream paper with formal letterheads and numbered exhibits. The language was dry, but the intent burned. They were suing for $350,000, citing costs related to my upbringing and emotional development, the phrase emotional development underlined twice. At the bottom was a breakdown of their calculations, including groceries, vacations, school supplies, extracurriculars, and a note that read, "Anticipated inheritance disruptions due to financial reallocations." I read that part twice. They were referring to the money they had already spent trying to save Melissa's restaurant, the money they believed they could reclaim through me. I called Karen right away. She picked up on the second ring. "I received it," I said. She didn't ask what it was. Her voice was calm and clipped. "I'll file a response. Don't talk to them. Don't respond to any messages. Just forward me everything." I did exactly that. Over the next few days, I built a digital archive of everything that had passed between us over the last decade. Transfers labeled gift or help or just hang in there. Emails from my mother asking if I could cover the utilities this month. Screenshots of Melissa texting at midnight asking for rent money for her assistant. I found old emails where my father had asked me to co-sign a loan for a car he eventually bought without me. I found a receipt for a commercial espresso machine I had purchased when Melissa's original supplier fell through. It had cost nearly $4,000. She never paid me back. I compiled all of it into a clean PDF labeled evidence and sent it to Karen. Her reply came 10 minutes later. "This is solid. They don't have a leg to stand on." Still, I couldn't sleep. I lay awake most nights replaying conversations from the past over and over, wondering where the tipping point had been. Was it when I stopped answering their guilt-laced calls? Was it when I finally said no? Or had this been coming all along, disguised as duty framed as love? The hearing was set for mid-April. I took time off work to prepare, not just legally, but mentally. I stopped explaining to friends. I stopped apologizing for my boundaries. I spent evenings reading case law I barely understood, trying to make sense of how something so personal had become public. On the morning of the court date, I wore a charcoal suit and the silver earrings my grandmother had given me when I got my first job. She called me that morning to say she believed in me and that she'd be praying for wisdom to win over pride. I stood in front of the mirror and looked at myself. Not the tired circles under my eyes, not the tension in my jaw. I looked deeper. I saw a woman who had given more than she owed, who had been kind without keeping score, who had drawn a line not out of cruelty but out of survival. I picked up my folder and left the apartment without looking back. The courthouse loomed against a gray sky, its columns chipped and paint fading. Inside, the air smelled like paper and cold coffee. I found Karen in the hallway, flipping through her notes. She looked up and nodded. Ready. I wasn't, but I said yes. Because some things need to be said in places where they can't be ignored. The bailiff called our case and we stepped inside. The courtroom was smaller than I expected, the walls a muted beige, and the chairs lined in rows with thin plastic backs that groaned every time someone shifted. There was no grandeur, no polished wood or dramatic lighting, just the weight of silence and the sharp tapping of heels echoing off tile floors. My parents sat on the left side of the room with Melissa between them, her hands folded tightly in her lap. She wore a soft blue blouse and no makeup, the picture of quiet burden. I almost believed it until I remembered the email from her 2 months ago asking if I could spot her $4,000 for inventory. She had said it was urgent. She had said please. She had never said thank you. On our side, it was just me, Karen, and an older man from her firm who handled filings. He nodded at me once and didn't speak again. Karen was calm as always, flipping through her binder as if she were preparing for a lecture, not a family trial. When the judge entered, everyone stood. He looked to be in his 60s, glasses perched low on his nose, his gaze tired but precise. He introduced himself formally and asked both parties to proceed. My father stood first. Your Honor, this is not a case of revenge or greed. We are here because we made sacrifices, real ones, to give our daughter the life she now enjoys. We paid for her food, her shelter, her education, her moral guidance. We created a foundation that led to her success. All we are asking is that she recognize that debt and help her sister in return. The judge nodded slowly. Did you contribute financially to your daughter's college education? My father hesitated. Well, she had a partial scholarship, and Julia's grandmother helped with the rest. So, no direct contributions. Correct. My mother spoke, then her voice firmer. But we raised her. We nurtured her. We didn't stop being parents when she turned 18. The judge asked, and did she live with you past 18? No, she moved out the summer before college. The judge made a note. He turned to Karen. Counselor. Karen stood. Your Honor, we have submitted documentation showing that my client has been fully financially independent since the age of 18. In fact, we have also included records of financial support given by my client to the plaintiffs over the past 10 years. This includes direct cash transfers, housing assistance, legal retainers, business equipment, and more. The judge looked through the file for nearly a minute. And the total value of this support, approximately $72,000, Your Honor. All unsolicited, all given in good faith. He turned to my parents. Can you confirm receipt of these amounts? My mother nodded. Yes, but that was family. It wasn't a loan. Of course, the judge said, but your claim here is not for a loan. It is for reimbursement for parental costs. Do you believe it is appropriate to seek reimbursement for costs already offset by your adult child's financial contributions? My father looked irritated. That money was not intended to balance out anything. It was optional. She did it because she could. The judge leaned back. So, because she gave freely, you now believe she should give more. Because she has no spouse, no children. Melissa spoke then quietly but with clear resolve. Julia has always had more than she needed. I don't. I have 3 kids and no partner. If she can afford to sit on a pile of money while I struggle, that's not family. That's selfishness. I stared at her, the words hitting like ice water. That was the truth, not cloaked in legal language or emotional manipulation, but blunt belief. She really thought I was selfish for keeping what I had earned. The judge nodded. So your argument is that family should share everything regardless of legal obligation. My mother jumped in again. We just think she should care enough to help. The judge raised a hand. And what if she disagrees? What if she draws a line? What if she says no? My father's face was red now. Then she's not the daughter we raised. Karen stood again. Your Honor, I would like to submit additional context. In our documents, you'll see timestamps for each transfer date, all of which align with specific requests from the plaintiffs. My client has acted in good faith repeatedly. Her refusal in this case is not from cruelty, but exhaustion. She is not a bank. She is not an emergency fund. She is a person who has set boundaries after years of silent support. The judge looked at me. Miss Bennett, do you wish to speak? I stood slowly, my heart pounding. I love my family, I said. That hasn't changed. What has changed is my willingness to be treated like a resource instead of a person. I did what I could for as long as I could, but there comes a point where giving becomes expected, where kindness becomes debt, and I refuse to live under that weight, not anymore. There was a long silence, then the judge spoke. Thank you. Closing arguments will be reviewed and a decision will be issued within 1 week. Court dismissed. We stood. My parents didn't look at me. Melissa didn't move. I walked out of the room without another word, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel guilty for doing so. The verdict came exactly 7 days later, delivered in an email from Karen with the subject line "ruling" attached. I opened it at my desk, heart thudding as if I were still standing in that cold courtroom. The document was brief, just under 3 pages, with the judge's conclusion highlighted near the end. After reviewing the submitted evidence, the court finds the plaintiff's claim to be without legal merit. The defendant, Julia Bennett, owes no financial reimbursement for costs associated with her upbringing. Furthermore, the court acknowledges prior financial support given by the defendant to the plaintiffs and their extended family members, which demonstrates a long-standing pattern of generosity and familial responsibility. The case is dismissed. I read the words twice, then a third time. It was over. No appeals, no conditions, just done. I stared at my screen, unable to process the relief and the sorrow twisting together in my chest. I had won, but it didn't feel like victory. Karen called a few minutes later, her voice calm as ever. Congratulations, Julia. Not every case like this ends with the truth winning. You did the right thing. I thanked her, hung up, and sat in silence. Outside, the sky was a soft gray, and the trees swayed like they were whispering things I didn't want to hear. That evening, I went for a walk around the block, letting the wind push against my jacket as if testing my balance. It felt good to move, to feel grounded again. For a moment, I let myself hope that maybe this would be the end of it. But of course it wasn't. 1 week after the ruling, I got a call from my grandmother. Her voice was tired, like it had aged a year since we last spoke. Your mother came by yesterday, she said. She wanted to talk about the inheritance. I stopped walking, frozen in the middle of the sidewalk. What about it? She asked if we could release her portion early. Said it was urgent, that the kids needed stability, that Melissa was going to lose everything. I closed my eyes. And what did you say? I told her we haven't decided anything yet, and that the will is still being updated. Did she argue? No, my grandmother said. She cried. That hurt more than I expected. Not because she had asked, but because she cried for money, not for me. She hadn't called after the ruling, hadn't reached out after everything we'd been through, but she could cry over dollars and paperwork. I thanked my grandmother and promised to visit soon. I didn't tell her that I had already decided not to attend Thanksgiving. I didn't tell her that I had started looking at houses outside the city further away than anyone in the family could comfortably drop by. I kept that to myself. A few months passed, quiet and uneventful. I closed on a small house with a fenced backyard and a lemon tree out front. I painted the walls soft green and bought secondhand furniture that I actually liked. I planted tomatoes and lavender and rosemary and adopted a gray cat who liked to sleep on the windowsill during storms. I started sleeping through the night again, waking up without the weight in my chest. The silence that used to haunt me now felt like peace. Then, almost a year to the day after the court date, I got an email. No subject line, just this. We heard you bought a house. Since you now have extra space, we think it would be best if Melissa and the boys moved in with you. It would be more convenient for everyone. Let us know when they can move in. Love, Mom and Dad. I stared at it for a long time. Not angry, not shocked, just done. I replied in a single sentence. I will not be hosting Melissa or the boys. If you contact me again with these kinds of requests, I will report it as harassment. Do not email me again. Then I blocked the address and made a pot of tea. The cat curled beside me on the couch, and the sun slid through the blinds like a quiet apology. I exhaled. I did not regret saying no, not anymore. Life after the courtroom didn't return to what it was before, because what it was before had always been unbalanced. But it settled into something else, something steadier. I found routines that felt like mine, not inherited from childhood habits or shaped by expectations, but chosen. In the mornings, I watered the garden and fed the cat whose name I never bothered to change from what the shelter had called him, Dusty. I went back to work, not because I had to, but because I wanted to. I liked the rhythm of coding the logic of systems that could be debugged unlike people. I started cooking simple meals with real ingredients and stopped apologizing for being alone. On weekends, I walked to the local bookstore or sat on my porch with a cup of mint tea, listening to the birds and the occasional neighbor who stopped to comment on the tomatoes. I didn't talk about the lawsuit or the fallout. Not with colleagues, not with friends, not even with my grandmother who still called once a week to remind me to check the batteries in my smoke detector. One afternoon, she mentioned that Melissa had moved back in with my parents. The restaurant lease had ended quietly, and the space was now a nail salon. I said I was sorry, and I meant it, but not in a way that meant I was going to help. I no longer felt the need to save people from choices they insisted on making. The emails stopped. The texts never resumed. Holidays passed without invitations, and I spent them walking trails wrapped in scarves, watching leaves change colors in silence. The quiet didn't hurt anymore. It felt like a room I had finally cleaned out after years of clutter. One day, I met someone. His name was Alex, and he was quiet in the way that let me breathe. He didn't ask about my family, and I didn't explain. We talked about books and breakfast and places we'd like to visit someday, maybe. He made me laugh, and that laughter didn't carry any weight. No history, just air. I didn't know what the future would be, but for the first time, it felt like something I could build, not just survive. I didn't win back a family, but I won myself. I used to think that love meant always saying yes, even when it hurt, even when it chipped away at something you couldn't name. I believed that family was a bond so sacred it could excuse anything, even betrayal wrapped in tradition. But now, I know better. Love without respect is just obligation, and obligation without consent is just control. I spent years being the dependable one, the silent helper, the person who always showed up even when no one asked if I needed someone to show up for me. I thought that was strength. I thought that was goodness. But there is nothing noble about letting yourself be drained in the name of loyalty. Sometimes walking away is the most honest form of love you can give. Because when people only love the version of you that bends to their needs, that's not love. That's convenience. I learned that the hard way, through courtrooms and cold emails and quiet nights where the only sound was my own breathing. But I'm still here, still standing, still whole. And that means something. That means everything. I'm not angry anymore, just clear. Clear about who I am and what I deserve. I deserve peace. I deserve reciprocity. I deserve to be seen, not just used, and if that means the circle of people around me is smaller than before, then so be it. I would rather sit alone in truth than be surrounded by expectations dressed up as affection. The world didn't change. My family didn't change. But I did. And that's enough. Some lessons are expensive, not in dollars, but in years. But if they lead you back to yourself, to your center, to your voice, then they are worth it. Every single time.